executing practical aspects in our lab, they are pretty difficult and requires a lot of skill. Without that skill, we either spoil the laboratory experiment or the measuring instrument, or the operator he himself or herself is put at the risk. I would like to discuss certain issues related with this. Probably you can get a tip how you can implement your own lab. And that's why I have given the name beginning with power electronics. The objective, this first session is divided into two parts, and then I will cover up the objectives separately. The first part has some objectives. Let's discuss these objectives one by one. To understand what power electronic is, we have to differentiate power electronics from general electronics very clearly. Then and then only we will be able to take special precautions. Why we should study power electronics separately, and what are the very ultimate precautions required to execute that particular lab. Next is how to define a power electronic converter. With the help of this, we will be able to again substantiate why our power electronic converters are different from general electronic equipment. And then to analyze different types of power electronic converters. It's a quite standard thing which we have been teaching in the classes for several years. I will just recap that part. Now, try to answer the first question. What is the power electronics? Let's consider a very simple example as shown in the figure, which I'm just trying to describe. In this figure, you can easily note there is a 100-volt DC source and it's feeding power to a 100 ohms load. One can think, what is so special about it? It's a simple network having only two components. But let's explore this example for understanding the power electronics. Let's make some quick calculations. The current supplied to the load and the current delivered by the source, both are same, and the current can be easily found as 100 volts divided by 100 amperes, 100 ohms, that is 1 ampere. The power received by the load PL is current square multiplied by resistance, that is 1 square into 100 is 100 watts. The power delivered by the source, that is source voltage multiplied by source current, that is 100 into 1 is 100 watts. Fine, that's great. Efficiency of using the power by this simple combination is 100%, which is something like ideal, which we want to achieve all the time. Now, let's make the problem a bit complicated towards our practical life. I don't want to make any change in the source. My source will remain 100 volts. My load will also remain same as 100 ohms, but I want that somehow the power consumed by the load must be reduced to 50 watts rather than 100 watts. What are the options available? What are the options available? So we can achieve this. First, let's say that I will insert a series resistance RS in series with the load resistance. The value of RS should be such that it reduces the current such that the resulting power dissipation is 50 watts. So required current can be obtained as 50 watts is equal to I square into 100 ohms. Solving this, we get I equal to 0.7071 amperes. Means the value of R should be determined in such a fashion that the resulting current gets reduced to 0.7071 amperes. We can calculate RS easily using our normal network rules. The solution seems to be very simple. Just insert a series resistance and get rid of this and my problem is solved. But let's see the power efficiency now. At this solution, we can easily see load power PL is current square multiplied by 100, that is 0.7071 ampere square multiplied by 100 ohms, that is 50 watts. The source is delivering 0.7 amperes at 100 volts. So the source power is 100 into 0.7071, that is 70 watts. Here now we can work out the efficiency with which we are utilizing the power. So efficiency of utilization is 50 watt upon 70 watt, that is 70%. We have lost 30% efficiency, which is significant now. It means 30% of the power supplied has to be wasted in resistor RS. This power means a lot in terms of revenue if we are talking at power levels. Besides this, there is a technical problem also. Suppose say rather than just 100 watts load, I have a 100 kilowatt load, and then my efficiency of using is 30%. I have to find a resistor which can continuously dissipate a power of 30 watts. And even at higher power levels, I may not get the resistance RS which can dissipate this power. Thus, the solution is unacceptable both technically as well as economically. Now, what to do? What next? Let's consider a switch SW is connected in place of that series resistor RS. The same has been shown in the adjoining figure. Assume that switch SW remains on for 1 second and remains off for 1 second, and the switching cycle is continuously repeated. This is shown in the diagram adjacent here. One can easily see the load voltage remains 100 volts for 1 second, 0 volt for 2 seconds, 100 volts during on period of the switch, 0 volts during off period of the switch. Load current jumps to 1 ampere during on period and gets reduced to 0 amperes during the off period. The load power jumps to 100 watts during on period and the 0 watts to off period. Now let's make some simple calculations. During on period, the energy consumed is 100 watts multiplied by 1, that is 100 joules. During off period, the energy consumed by the load is 0 watts supplied for 1 second, 0 joules. During one full switching cycle, load has received energy equal to 100 joules. Energy supplied during on period, that is on the source side now. Source current is same as the load current during that period. So the energy supply, power supplied by the load source is 100 watts, and the energy is 100 watts into 1 second is 100 joules. During off period, no current, so the source doesn't supply any energy. The total energy supplied by the source in one switching cycle of 2 seconds is 100 joules. Let's make the average power consumed by the load, that is 100 joules over a period of 2 seconds, that is 50 watts. So I have achieved the target that my energy power consumed by the load, now it is average not continuous, is 50 watts, and the energy of utilization is during this period I supplied 100 joules and during the same period I received 100 joules. So energy utilization is 100%. This solution seems to be of great advantage because of its energy efficiency. And if I can tolerate the pulsating power, this solution seems great. Anyhow, by using some special means, I can reduce the pulsations in the power received by the load. And I can, if my load can tolerate such small changes, this solution seems to be very challenging. It's important to mention the switching power supplies which we use in very small power supplies like our mobile charger of hardly 1 watt or less than that, up to hundreds of kilowatts or megawatts of drives. All these power supplies are basically based on switching techniques which we have just described, because they offer extremely high efficiencies. That's why everywhere, wherever power supplies are involved, we talk of handling power with the help of switches. Fine. We are now in a position to understand what has happened exactly in this case. In this later case, where we are not using series resistance, we are using the switch in series with the load. This is a case of power electronics where power is regulated as a resistor, as a control element. So wherever switches are involved for regulating power, we come across the power electronics. This simple diagram shows the general layout electronic converter. Raw electrical power is available to us, and somehow it is required that the raw electrical power which is available is not suitable for optimum performance of my load. So I convert the shape or convert the form of raw electrical power into an electrical power which suits my load for its optimum performance. So what I do, I feed this raw electrical power to an assembly of static switches. These static switches are being controlled with the help of a control circuit, and then operation of the switches uh, uh, modifies the raw electrical power into a form that offers my load to perform in the optimum way. Combination. This particular combination is called a power electronic converter. In olden days, when we migrated from DC transmission to AC transmission, majority of loads were still in DC form, while supply migrated from DC to AC. This time we wanted to have a kind of converters which can convert AC power into DC power, and those equipment they call as converters. So we still use to DC conversion. But as far as the modern definition is considered, converters are nothing but those assembly of static switches being controlled with the help of control circuits, where raw electrical power is fed to the assembly of switches. Operation of assembly of switches causes electrical power to take a new shape, which offers the optimum performance of my load. So all power electric converters are basically converters. But let's see, as far as the old definition is concerned, how do we classify converters? Uh, Mostly we classify converters based on in what form the raw electrical power is available and in what form the converted power is available to the load. If input is AC, output is DC, we call it simply a converter. If input is DC, output is AC, which is inverse of the previous one. That's why it's called inverter. If input is DC, output is also DC, we call this as a chopper. If input is AC and output is AC, but with a typical combination of, like, this is a line commutated converter and the output frequency is sub integer division of the input frequency, such converters are called cycloconverters. These days these converters have disappeared. There appears some non-standard textbooks which are available in power electronics, where they do not use line commutated switches. In they still call this a cycloconverter, but in my opinion, and as far as the standard texts are concerned, AC to AC converters where line commutation is used and output frequency is sub integer division of the input frequency, such converters are called cycloconverters. Anyhow, such converters are rarely used these days. Then the last one is AC to input is and output frequency is same as input frequency. Such converters are called AC regulators. In the first part of the presentation, we have understood what power electronics is. In the same presentation, we have defined what a power electronic converter is. Then ultimately, we have classified different types of power converters. In the second part, we will classify different types of static switches, because static switches form the core of the power electronic converter. So we will, and then we will try to find out what kind of drivers are required. The main objective of this later part of the presentation is talking about drivers, where little is available in standard textbooks and courses, and without this we are not able to make any converter out of the knowledge which we have gained in our coursework. Static switches, here we will try to limit our discussion only to the extent that what kind of drivers are required. To understand the turning on and turning off requirements for these static switches, to understand the need of electrical isolation between control circuit and power circuit, this particular aspect is hardly dealt in any standard textbooks. Whereas when you construct a power electronic converter, this isolation plays a very, very, very important role. And then one has to depend on the data sheets and application notes supplied by the isolation circuit manual, which I got to understand. Then the role and power circuit. Although you get the ready-made drivers in market, but what kind of driver is supposed to be purchased, that you should know. And there are three important techniques we will be discussing by which you provide the isolation, and you have to pick up one of these three. I have discussed that, the construction of two types of drivers. Basically, you can construct your own drivers if very high performance is not required. Cost is the important criteria. Then later on, if you find that yes, now you need very high performance, you want to operate the converter at very high frequency, you want professional, then you can migrate to the ready-made professional grade driver circuits. Else you can your own circuits and expose your students to these circuits also. Okay, classification of switches now. Depending on whether it conducts in one direction or other direction. A switch may be unidirectional. It conducts in only one direction. In other direction, it offers very high impedance and it blocks the passage of current through it, like diode. So diode is a unidirectional. There are some other examples: diode, silicon control rectifier, power MOSFET, IGBT, light activated SCR, GTO, etc. These are some of the examples of a unidirectional switch. A switch may be bidirectional. Now, if it can conduct in both the directions, then we call it a bidirectional switch. Presently, we have only one example, like TRIAC, which conducts in both the directions. A switch may be unipolar switch if the current flow through the switch is caused by only one polarity charge moments. Means you have two types of, or two polarity of charges. The current moment can be affected because of the moment of holes, or it can be affected because of the moment of free electrons. So if only electrons or only holes are participating in the process of flow of current, we call that switch as a unipolar switch. There are some typical switches, like power MOSFET is an example of a unipolar switch. The polarity of charge which we usually prefer in a switch, that is free electron. The reason is very important. Free electrons have the very good mobility, and the switches constructed with the help of this type of moment of charges, they are good in their dynamic performance. So power MOSFET, as we all know, it has got very small turning on and turning off times. So this is because we use the electron as the charge carriers. Holes are not involved. Although you get some power MOSFETs to a limited rating where these MOSFETs are P MOSFETs, where holes are used, but their dynamic performance is extremely bad. So at power levels, we generally discourage the P-type MOSFETs. We go for N-type MOSFETs. A switch may be bipolar, as we said, where both electrons and holes are involved in causing the load current to flow. Since mobility of holes is extremely poor, the dynamic performance of such switches where bipolar conduction is used, such switches have poor dynamic performance. Their frequency the frequency to which they can be used for switching, it is low. So generally we avoid using use of bipolar static switches if we want to go for higher frequency of switchings. Diode, SCR, TRIAC, IGBT, GTO, these are few of the examples of bipolar junction, bipolar switches. Another important way by which we can classify the switches is a switch may be controlled, it may have a controlled turn on if conduction is controlled externally. Like SCR or TRIAC, these are some examples. Means like a diode where the moment it gets forward bias, means we do not have any control over the beginning of the. Whereas in case of silicon control rectifier, the turn on is affected by putting a gate current into the gate of this SCR. So the turn on is under our control. You may have a switch where turn on and turn off, both the events are under our control. So we can turn on a switch by external means, and we can have the turn off also by external means. Whereas in case of SCRs, once the device is turned on, the external efforts cannot control its turn off process. So in the second case, both turn on and turn off are under my control, and in the previous case, only turn on was under my control. Power BJT, power MOSFET, IGBT of switches where turn on and turn off are under our control. Why we are trying to discuss this at length? Because the driver circuits must consider these particular aspects of a switch. A switch is called latching switch. If it turns on with the application of turn on effort, it will remain on even if the turn on effort is removed. Means something like our tube light switch. Apply a pressure and the switch is turned on. Remove the pressure, the switch remains in the on state. It gets latched in conduction. So once the switch is turned on, it doesn't require any control effort for keeping it in conduction. Such switches have great advantage, and the devices which fall under this category are silicon control rectifier, gate turn-off thyristor, triac. These are particularly belonging to the thyristor family of switches, static switches. Then there are some switches called non-latching switches. If you want to turn it on, apply the control effort, it will remain on only till the control effort is present. For such switches, you have to continuously keep the turning on of or keeping it turned on effort continuously as long as you want to keep it in the on state. Power BJT, power MOSFET, IGBT, these are some of the examples of non-latching switches. These days, most of the time, we are using non-latching switches. Now, turn on and turn off requirements of the switches. As I said, we are discussing all these things, although you know it very well, but from the viewpoint of designing and selecting the driver circuits. So we want to discuss these switches. Turn on and turn off requirements of these switches. The turn on and turn off requirements of these switches dictate the design of control circuit and isolation circuit also. There is a very important, this is very important to understand these requirements for different switches, because if we do not have drivers, we cannot make converter. For making drivers, these particular aspects must be known for individual switch. Latching switches, as we discussed, like SCR, GTO, triac, these switches require a short duration pulse. Once they are latched in conduction, the turn on effort can be removed. So a simple pulse which ensures turning on of the switch is required. Once the switch is latched in conduction, the turn on effort can be removed. Means we need basically a short duration pulse which turns on the switch. Electromagnetic pulse isolation is commonly used. We will discuss this at larger length. For turning on these devices, control circuits are designed in such a way that they generate short. We'll see why we need short duration pulses and what are the advantages of short duration pulses, and how electromagnetic isolation becomes important for such applications. Now, because we have to keep the gate drive or the control drive as long as we keep the switch in the on state. So non-latching switches require continuous control effort to keep them in the on state. If I want to keep the switch on the on state for 1 second, my control effort should be there for 1 full second. So simple single pulse isolation is difficult here, rather uneconomical, I will say. Technically it's feasible. In old days people used to do it, but now it has become uneconomical. Electromagnetic isolation is unsuitable for such applications. We have come up with a new breed of drivers. These are called optical isolator based drivers. Optical isolators can change and charge pumps are commonly used for controlling such switches. Some switches are current controlled. Means basically these they need current to be injected into their control terminal so that they are turned on. That is, they need basically current. SCR and power BJT we know very well. These are current driven, current controlled devices. Their control circuits should be capable of delivering the required control current. So when designing the control circuit for these switches, we must consider the output must be able to deliver the current required for putting this current control switch into the on state. Some switches are voltage control switches. Basically, they are potential driven. They have made the life of a power electronic engineer very comfortable. That is, they need only voltage to control them. Very small value of current is required. So the stress on the part of designing the control circuit or driver, it has been reduced a lot. The devices, switches which are based on voltage control, these are power MOSFET, insulated gate bipolar junction transistor. These are the voltage control devices. Some other sophisticated high power devices are also there, but these are commonly used devices. Their control circuits should be capable of delivering the required voltage in proper wave shape. I'm not discussing wave shape here. The rise time and fall time must be very sharp. If the rise time and fall time, these are not very sharp, then device will remain in the active state for some time, and this may lead to total destruction of the device during turn on itself. Need for providing electrical isolation between control circuit and power circuit. Again, this part is hardly discussed in our syllabus or in our textbooks. So I would like that you all teachers should concentrate on this part. If you are exposed, fine. If you need some input, this is very, very important aspect if you want to move from theoretical pages of the books to the laboratory table. So let's discuss this at length. Need for providing electrical isolation between control circuit and power circuit. This is very, very important aspect for practicing power electronic engineers. Thorough understanding of this is very, very essential. I'm repeatedly telling. About 30 years back, I faced the same problem and nobody was ready to explain me. I went to Mumbai and bought a book of GE SCR manual, and that manual gave some details, and from there I started learning the skills required in the field of power electronics and started growing. Now I share through my lectures that how you can make your own power electronic converters comfortably like that. Okay, let's consider a simple electromagnetic relay as a switch. The simplest switch, which is not static, electromagnetic relay. In this relay, we can easily see there are 4 terminals, or 2 circuits more precisely. One is the coil, which when we energize, this attracts the armature and closes the power terminals. So there are 2 electrical circuits which are independent of each other, control circuit and power circuit. If we count in terms of the terminals, then you have 2 control terminals and 2 power terminals. So a very close observation reveals the switch has 2 control terminals and the 2 power terminals. They are electrically isolated from each other. There is no electrical connectivity between control terminals and power terminals. This leads to an important advantage. My control circuit, from where the coil energizing current is coming, has nothing to do with the power circuit. So I can have a separate 12 volt power supply and some switching circuitry that will switch the relay, and power terminals will be closed, and power will not at all enter into my control circuit. So I can have my control circuit operating at a different potential as compared to, or with respect to, the power circuit. Means I can touch, I can handle my control circuit, I can connect my measuring instruments in control circuit without really bothering that what is the potential on power circuit part. So it's a great advantage in this particular switch structure where control terminals and power terminals are different. Now, switches, we are not that fortunate. Consider as a simple switch. All our power switches, they have more or less similar structure. I am taking just a case of silicon control to any other power electronic switch. Now, on in the figure here, red terminals I'm showing as power terminals, and blue terminals I'm showing as control terminals. These are the control terminals. I will inject current into the gate terminal and collect it from cathode to turn it on. If proper value of gate current is injected and the switch is forward, current will enter from the anode side and will leave the cathode side. It means very clear here that cathode is common between control circuit and power circuit. It's very important. Cathode is common between control circuit and power circuit, which is unlike in our relay kind of thing. No electrical connection with the electrical power contacts, and this brings in a lot of problems in design. So let's discuss that what kind of these problems could be. I am just putting a simple example, and lot many can be said about different examples can be taken why we should separate electrically the control circuit from the power circuit. Here I am showing in this diagram a control circuit. This at the output it generates two pulses for two SCRs and injecting current into the two gates, gate 1 and gate 2. Naturally, when we are injecting current, we have to collect this current back into the ground line. So current is injected into the gate 1 and collected from cathode 1, which is a power terminal. Other injects current into gate 2, collects the current from its cathode C2 and puts it back into the ground, same ground. So essentially, I am connecting cathodes of the two thyristors C1 and C2 to the common ground potential. It is not necessary that in my power circuit, these two SCRs are connected such that their cathodes are at the same potential forcefully. Like say in bridge circuit, the very best one can understand these two cathodes are at different potential when the SCRs on the upper limb of the converter. Similarly, when we consider IGBT bridge, the emitters of the IGBTs on the upper limb of the converter, they are at different potential. So if I connect my control circuit this way, there will be a dead short circuit between the power circuit using or through this common the ground of the control circuit. My switches will be destroyed, my control circuit will be destroyed, terminals, my operating personnel will also be put in danger. So I cannot connect my control circuit directly to the state. This may create, in most of the cases, it will create short circuit through the ground of my control circuitry. So we have to design a mechanism by which we can isolate electrically. Means we must make sure that control circuit doesn't share any electrical contact with the power. Generate a kind of interface circuit which has to be put between control circuit and the power circuit, and this makes sure that the power circuit and control circuit, they are isolated from each other. This is very important, and then we are going to discuss how one can achieve this. As I said, these things are generally not mentioned in our syllabus and textbooks also. There are two ways that can achieve the task of isolation. In fact, there are three ways. Third part I'm not discussing here, so I will not mention in detail. That is charge pumps. Aspect, electromagnetics using optical means. You can isolate two electrical circuits using electromagnetic means and using optical means. Let's discuss each one of them at length. I'm sharing some circuit diagrams also. So if you want, you can assemble yourself. To understand the electromagnetic isolation, let's consider the two-winding transformer has been considered. The blue winding I'm showing, it's primary winding, which is fed with energy. Secondary winding, from where I will get the energy. We all know very well the is 798%. So whatever energy I am putting in primary, almost same energy is coming. There is no electrical connection between primary and secondary windings. They are each other. What does it mean? It means that my control signal, if I apply in primary, 100% efficiency to the secondary instantaneously, and there is no electrical connection between the two windings. They are isolated from each other. The transfer of energy, as we all know, takes place because of electromagnetic induction. We have been teaching this transformer construction helps us a lot in power electronic converters. Let's see how we can do it. One important thing which one should understand, the physical size of the transformer. We all have taught design of transformers. The physical size of the transformer depends upon the frequency of current. If you remember the EMF equation of a transformer, E equal to 4.44 F phi m into number of turns. So if frequency is large, frequency is small, for the same applied voltage, flux has to be large, and will increase the area cross section and the size of the transformer. This means that current pulses of a smaller time, means frequency is large, will require smaller size of the core because flux density is less. And if I use wider current pulses, means time period is large, means frequency large, and the size of the transformer will also be large, and my transformer will be economical, bulky in size, like that. This forces the designers to restrict transformer for transferring narrow current pulses only. As I said, if the width of the pulse is small, the associated frequency is large. Time period is small, frequency is large, flux requirement will be low, and small duration pulses, narrow pulses, I can use the pulse transformer or transformer as an isolating device. Latching switches we know very well. They need only a narrow pulse to turn it on, and then once the device has been turned, we can remove the pulse. So naturally, transformer or isolation based driver circuits, these are very suitable. This is what in a brief I have said about this. Of pulsation, which is 1% here, the energy or the current and energy which is required for the operation of the switch, which is available in the secondary, has been transferred from the primary. On the secondary side. So the number of power supplies required in electromagnetic type of you need only one power supply, and multiple such control circuits drivers can be fed power supply. So their power supply requirements are pretty simple, but their main problem is only short duration pulses can be processed with the help of this kind of switches. Generally, we call them as pulse amplifiers. Here, one pulse amplifier I have made myself. I am using it for conducting my workshop, which is being commonly used. Here you can see in input a small 5 volt 2 milliampere 3 milliampere pulse, which we usually obtain from microcontrollers, is fed to a small signal transistor, which ultimately turns on big PNP transistor, which is usually power Darlington, and then this conducts the current to the primary of the pulse transformer. I have shown two secondaries here with G2, K2 and G1, K1S terminals, which are ultimately connected to the gate and cathode of devices like SCR and so on. So here I need a separate power supply of 12 volts, but this separate 12 volt power supply, which amplifies the strength and amplitude of the signal, can feed multiple pulse amplifiers. We will see how this is being connected. Another important driver, which we very commonly use, because these days the use of SCR has been almost reduced below 10%. These days we mainly use either IGBTs or power MOSFETs, depending on the power handling requirements and voltage levels. So we generally use optical isolator based drivers. I'm sharing the small picture of a optical based driver, ready-made driver. We used to make such drivers with the discrete components earlier, but now these drivers are available at very affordable cost, and uh, there is no additional processing required. So in the input, you have pin number 2 to 3. There is an IR LED connected inside the isolator. The light falls on the photo transistors inside the chip, and then there are two MOSFETs which turn on. If no light, the lower MOSFET turns on, output is driven to 0. If the IR radiations are falling on the photo transistor, the upper MOSFET turns on and the output is hooked up to VCC. This particular FOD3180, this can generate voltages up to 20 volts. This can feed currents up to 2 amperes, which are the operating driver currents for most of the large size IGBTs. So you can, if you want to construct, just download the application note of FOD3180, and you will find that you can make your own optical driver with great comfort. Here, I'm trying to show how the drivers are used in power converters. So you will see raw electrical power is fed to an assembly of switches. These are being controlled with the help of amplifiers and isolation circuit, which is must now. I have to isolate control circuit from the assembly of switches. As just I quoted, there are two approaches we have discussed. In one case, electromagnetic isolation, that is pulse amplifier. I have a control circuit, and then this is generating two outputs. One goes to circuit 1, another goes to circuit 2. And because outputs are isolated through transformers, so I'm using same power supply for feeding pulse amplifier 1 and pulse amplifier 2. If I use 3 such circuits or 4 such circuits or 6 such circuits, only one power supply is required. So when I'm using pulse amplifiers, using electromagnetic isolation, the complexities on the part of power supply are very fair, and one can operate these circuits very comfortably. With only limitation, the width of the pulses which I transmit through this that is restricted. Now, the other important part which we discussed later, that is optical isolator based. Each optical isolator circuit, as we have seen in FOD 3180, we require a separate power supply. So here is my control circuitry, and this is feeding power to optical isolator 1 through one output, and through another output, optical circuit isolator circuit 2. Each circuit requires one power supply, which is isolated. So if I have such 6 gate drivers, then I will require such 6 regulated DC power supplies. So wider pulses can be transmitted. Very good rise time, fall times can be obtained, quite economic. But the additional requirements of the power supply, one power supply per isolator, makes the overall driver very complicated. But still, people use this in a single package, and these are very popularly known. If you want to buy, these are available commercially, but the problem is the commercial of these drives. Once they become defective because of any mistake, then these are all surface mount devices, and then you cannot do anything with this. So what I recommend, you go and download the FOD3180 application note, study it a bit. If you need PCBs, I can supply PCBs to you people, and you can make your own driver, which can be maintained by you people. So I'm finishing the first part of the presentation. Any conversation you want, any difficulty you have? I should allow participants to annotate, right?
Not annotate. If anybody is having any query, please raise your hand. As we have discussed in the morning also, we are having an option to raise the hand and ask any questions. Sir is taking 2 sessions. So one of the session, I think he has already, that is over now. And if you have any query in that session, please raise your hand so that he can answer that query.
I think no queries.
As of now, there is no query. So would like to continue, or you want to take? We should take a
Say
break.
yeah, 15-20 minutes break will do.
Okay, fine, sir. So
Right now it is I think 1-1-5, 2-5, right?
2-5. Yes.
So
30.
220 will do. Ask participants,
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. Hmm?
right?
So 220
220
will
will
be
do.
done. 220 will do.
Oh, okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, sir.
Thank you, participants. Thank you very much.
So we'll rejoin again at 220 after 15 minutes, right?
Yes, yes,
Thank you.
yes, right. Oh.